I think I'm good. All right. Okay. I'll recall the special regional council meeting to order then. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make the
Moved moved by Councillor Dolan, seconded by Councillor Penny. All those in favor? Carried. And petitions, delegations to Fort Nelson Public Library. And we will await their arrival.
You just told me they couldn't get on and they're trying again. There they are.
Hello.
Hello, Danica. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Good. We are all ready for your presentation regarding the hospital.
The hospital.
Oh, awesome.
I'm sorry, hospital. I'm reading the word hospital. I meant to say library. I'm sorry. And well, you've got a mask on. You sort of look like a nurse.
Oh, I think I've always wanted.
Instead of the hospital, could you do the library for us?
I suppose I could try.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. All right. Hello, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to present our budget to you. My name is Danica Andrews. I am the new library director. And with me is Julia Stidolf, our longstanding bookkeeper and programmer. Also present is our library board chair, Laura Clark. I am hoping that everyone has had the time to go over the budget information and annual report that I have provided to Ryan. I would like to highlight that our budget shows an almost $30,000 reduction in our grant funding request, which reflects the savings realized by our 2020 COVID-19 closure, as well as staffing changes in our senior positions. I am hoping we can answer any questions Council and Mayor may have regarding our budget this year. And I guess I will now open it up to any questions.
Very well. Councilors, you have before you the library budget. Did you have any questions for Ms. Andrews? Okay, I will ask Ms. Andrews a question. During COVID-19, what steps were taken to minimize the expenses for the library?
Minimize the expenses.
Yes.
All right. Can you explain what expenses mean? Sorry.
Sorry, expenses.
Oh, expenses to minimize.
Sorry.
Expenses. No worries. Well,
I'm not really sure.
I'm not really sure. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Councilor Roper?
Just a comment, Mr. Mayor. With the pandemic, expenses for any business or nonprofit, I don't think that was possible to minimize expenses. In fact, I think the pandemic, COVID-19, increased expenses on a lot of these groups. So I'm not so much focused on, where we save money, but I'm very impressed that the library was able to reduce their taxation request. I'm also very impressed with how the library conducted themselves during the pandemic, how they got restarted. I know that they partnered with other groups. They got the word out on their library takeout and all of their initiatives. So I just want to express thanks for still being here. Everyone's really lucky to be here, and you guys did a great job. And I had to look over the budget, not line by line. Didn't have time for that, but I really appreciate the efforts that were made to save money on this year.
So, Ms. Andrews, you furloughed some employees, did you not?
Yes, we did. We had a few staffs who, some willingly would ask for leave from the library during our closure, and some big staff changes as well in our senior management. Our previous library director, Fiona Bruce, left, and so did our history lead, Jennifer Coupe, which we are very sad to see both of them go.
Yes, they were an asset to the organization. So by furloughing these employees, that reduced the expenses for the library, did it not?
Absolutely, yes. So we did have many staff who were furloughed during our closure. We also had, we didn't have janitorial services through our closure as well. Staff were able to pick that up. So we had some really big savings in our janitorial costs. We didn't do very much professional development this year due to COVID, so we had some pretty big savings regarding that. We had savings through rent thank you to Mayor and Council for giving us that as well. I can't think of anything off the top of my head otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just add, Mayor, that the opening hours were reduced. Obviously, they were closed for a while. And then when the library came back online, it was at a reduced service level and slowly increasing. And hopefully someday soon we'll get back to the full 7 days a week operating schedule. But I think that that was cost savings as well, hence part of the $30,000 reduction. And just to confirm that this is a one-time reduction based on the dollars that were saved over the pandemic closure.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for Ms. Andrews? Okay, Councilor Gerwin.
Is there anything that you would like to tell us that we haven't asked? Any highlights, any big moments, anything new upcoming for the end of this pandemic?
Yeah, so going forward, we have plans to do a lot of retrofits due to COVID. So we have plans to move our current location for our computers to our entryway to give more space for users. We're currently down to 2 computers that we can use at a time right now because of social distancing regulations and others. We have a couple others too that we're excited about. Some other things I'd like to highlight is that we went fines free from March 16th until the end of December. So there was no late fees for any patrons who were at home and just offering that kindness to everyone who needed that extra support during that time. We have had a large decrease in our physical circulation, but I think directly due to COVID, we've had a pretty significant increase in our e-resources, the circulation, as well as our interlibrary loan circulation, which has been kind of a highlight for everyone. And another thing I'd like to highlight that we had our book sales closed, which maybe not be a highlight, I shouldn't say, but because of that closure, we have had a reduction in income thanks to the closure of our book sales. Sorry, I'm super nervous. This is my first time doing it.
that's okay.
You're doing great. You're doing awesome.
Yeah,
You're doing
fine.
good.
Thank
not
you.
to worry.
So, Ms. Andrews, is there anything in 2021 that you're looking forward to, assuming that we get out of this pandemic? Can you tell us some of the plans for the library in the upcoming year?
Have a very hopeful plans that we'll be able to return to some in-service programming, but for the time being, we're really excited for some of the online programming options we're going to be offering. Stay tuned. There's a lot in the incoming months. We're looking forward to the relocation of our computers, as I said before, and a few of the other upgrades that we are currently doing. Some other things that we are looking forward to is a return to our normal hours of operation. That would be a wonderful thing. Yeah, that's really it so far.
And
Have you noticed, Councilor Gerling?
Can I just add to that, so the Northeast Library Federation, is that the right, NELF, but anyways, so we're a part of that. And that federation has put some extra additional funding into electronic resources so that when a certain, whether it's an audiobook or a book, whatever, gets to a certain amount of people are waiting, they will purchase another copy of that resource, which would be available only for people in the Northeast. So I think that that really shows how the libraries across the Northeast, well, right across the province really, are really stretching and growing and trying new things during this terrible time.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. That was wonderful. I completely had forgotten about that. I appreciate it. Another thing that we're actually really excited about that I just remembered is that we had a $10,000 technology grant through 2020. We haven't got to spend it yet. So in 2021, we'll be really focusing on purchasing some really amazing tech opportunities for our patrons to use, such as take-home STEM kits, such as astronomy kits, and there's biology and anatomy kits, and we're pretty excited about that. And we're looking at purchasing a that one called for the language? Mango?
Bingo, yeah.
Mango, and it is so that it's a free resource for patrons to use that helps you build any type of language. So you can learn how to speak Japanese, you can learn how to speak Spanish, and the app's very thorough, and we're pretty excited about that as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Andrews, you had any questions?
What's for supper?
I was muting you.
I knew he was going to say that.
I just want to add to one thing, Mayor and Council, is that, so the library is doing a mini renovations so that the public can access the computers in a more safe manner. And all of that work is local. So just to highlight that will be happening, and it is local that's being used.
Excellent. So throughout the pandemic, have you noticed an increase in people using computers or needing access to computers?
We've actually noticed a pretty large decrease in computer usage, and
Okay.
that's because we're down right to 2 only, and we've reduced our time allowed in the library to 1 hour maximum a day. So that's
Okay.
also shown a big decrease in users.
Okay. Any other questions? Any comments? Very well. Hearing none, I will thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. She did so much things. Yeah, very nerve-wracking, by the way.
You
Yeah,
bless
great.
you have your mask on.
Oh, yeah, you should see how red my face is behind my mask.
But Councillor Andrews is the hardest one of the bunch, really.
Oh, I already know that.
Mrs. McIver, we won't be having the library or the Historical Society here till 12:30. So I'm going to ask for a motion to temporarily adjourn the special regional council or special regional council meeting. Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Andrews, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi.
It was.
I know, it was cold.
I
So,
bought Dave a little weather station for Christmas that sits on our kitchen counter, and I'm about ready to throw it away because I kind of liked it better when I didn't know, because then it was just a surprise, when you went out to warm up your truck. But now, going out that it's -26, it's like, oh.
I have one of those too, and I just, don't want to even see it.
I'm going to call the special regional council meeting back to order again. Mrs. Zaglinski, the Historical Society, are you ready to make your presentation?
I
Oh,
don't know
and,
that I have a
Ms. Starr as
presentation.
well.
Allison might. I'm assuming the treasurer's going to give that report for the financial statements that you have in front of you.
Ms. Starr, go right ahead.
Yeah, well, I think you probably already have copies of the documents. As you know, 2020 was kind of a very different year from what we expected, and I know lots of other organizations found the same thing. The museum board did contemplate not opening the museum at all, but both for the citizens of Fort Nelson and for keeping some local employment going, we felt that it was important to open if we could. So we did open a month later than usual, and we were expecting low visitor numbers, so we reduced our operating hours. We hired fewer students, and we did reduce some other staff costs. We kept some of our buildings closed, both to work with fewer staff and also to deal with less cleaning. And we also cut our inventory costs by basically not ordering anything we hadn't already ordered. We were also successful in getting some student grant funding again. And we did get a little bit of funding for some direct COVID expenses, and Kim worked really hard on getting those for us. So we were able to keep our costs down, as you can see from our statements. And again, due to COVID, we held our AGM with a Zoom meeting before this year, which, it went okay. It was not the same as our usual dinner and talk, but you got to do what you got to do. And at that AGM, The only changes to our board are that Jeannie Kenaway, who was on for the last year, has stepped down, and Margaret Ann Hall has rejoined us. And all of our permanent part-time staff remain the same. And we hope for the summer to get back a number of our students that have worked for us for several years. We've been very fortunate that way. We're anticipating 2021 will be similar in a lot of ways, and we're starting to get prepared for that. We will, if we do better with student grants, and depending on what happens with the COVID stuff, we might be able to open up more of our buildings, or we may just keep to doing what we did last year. Our big plan last year was to start our expansion. Our hope was that we could start that basically as soon as, well, early spring, really, as soon as we were able to get going in the spring, and that didn't work out for a variety of reasons. The initial tenders were not ready to go out early. So it wasn't, in fact, until the end of July or maybe even early August that those came out, and there was quite a short turnaround on those. And so, again, I think due to COVID and due to the timing, the costs were much higher than we anticipated, so we were not able to move forward with that. We did do some negotiation with one of the bidders, but we couldn't come to a number that was going to work for us. Because of that, and we also discovered that the amount held in the reserve with the town was less than we were anticipating. So we've applied for some grants, both through Kim, and we did forget if it was one or both of them. Kim dealt with most of that, did deal with an outside grant writer for one of the larger ones that is, I don't know, a little bit iffier to get, I guess. So the reserve funding, we did not realize that when the town changed from a town to a regional municipality, that they changed how our funds were held. When we started saving up for that addition, we were led to understand that those funds were invested for us by the town, and we were entitled to all the earnings that those funds accumulated. Well, apparently that changed when the town became a regional district, and for whatever reason, we were never made aware of that change. I don't know what happened. I mean, there's no sense going back and trying to point fingers or whatever. That's history now, 11 years ago. We have, however, been putting in budgets with that line for earnings in there every year since then, and nobody ever picked up that that money was not there and bothered to tell us about it. So whatever, what it means is that that money that we were anticipating for earnings isn't there, and so it's made a difference. Like, we would have been asking for more money probably for the last several years if we had realized that there was less in the reserve. And also because the budget came in, or the quotes we got last year on the tenders were much higher than we anticipated. And part of that was due to COVID. Part of that was probably due to anticipating a fall start date. But the architect we've been dealing with had thought that our budget was quite reasonable, and apparently it wasn't. So anyway, this year we're asking for the full $200,000, which is what we're able to ask for every year. And we are really hoping that those grants come in so that we can go ahead with the addition this year. It's going out for tender again. I think it was supposed to be January. I think there's been a bit of a delay again, but should be shortly. And we really would like to be able to start that addition. If we don't get at least some of the grant funding we've applied for, that may not be possible. So we should know by mid or end of February what's happening with both the tenders and the grants. And at that point, we may, if we're not as successful with our grant funding, we would like to be able to discuss with mayor and council the possibility of accessing some additional funding from the municipality so that we can actually proceed with the addition. If that's not possible, what we would like to do then would be to take those reserve funds and invest them ourselves so that we are getting earnings on them. And it may be several years before we can go ahead with the addition. So yeah, it is what it is. The whole COVID timing really didn't help. I know the cost of building materials went way up last year, and it so far is not looking much better for 2021. So, I mean, there's not much you can do about that. It is what it is. So we shall see what happens over the next month or so, I guess, and see how it goes. So
I'll just add to that a little tiny bit, anticipating some of the questions we could get. We did apply for $1.3 million in grant funding, 1 million from the Provincial Emergency Infrastructure something or other. It is designed for shovel-ready projects, in which it doesn't get more shovel-ready than a project that's already been tendered. We anticipated with that one that it would be oversubscribed, so we did hire Andy Ackerman to do that grant so that we could put forth the strongest grant possible to give us the best chance. Then we also applied to NDIT for a cultural infrastructure grant. That one was for $300,000. And that one myself and Krista from the town worked together on and submitted that one as well. They both, we should know one way or the other with both of them mid to late February, and then they would disperse the funds mid to late March. We have a board meeting this evening in which there's going to be some discussions about changing the board. We haven't had that discussion yet, but our architect's been working behind the scenes to try and find some other cost savings for us, and he believes he has found a significant cost savings, but we will have to have that discussion with the board, and that is just changing the building material from wood, which we would love to use, obviously, but who would have, we originally had plywood, we switched to OSB, not, who would have thought OSB would be worth more than plywood, but it is what it is, and it is. So he's looking at, I'm going to call it a concrete composite because I don't know what it's called, but it's the same stuff that Ed Bully used to build the last few of his buildings here in town, where there are those cement slabs that you just kind of slide them in. And those can be painted any color we want. And they can also be stamped with some kind of a wood grain to tie it into the museum. So we don't just have this ugly cement structure behind the long building. That's a discussion we're going to have today. That does bring our costs down by way of setup time. It cuts off about 2 to 3 weeks. It goes up a lot faster if by chance, obviously our first preference would be to use a local contractor. Unfortunately, if we can't, it would certainly save us some money on living out expenses and stuff like that if the building goes up 2 to 3 weeks faster than it would using wood. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Everything is up in the air. We've done, Allison has mentioned all the cost savings. We've, I've taken a reduction in my total hours of work. Marl has taken a total reduction in his hours of work. So is Jamie. So none of us are working the same amount of hours we were, prior to COVID. And basically there's the line items speak for themselves. We've cut our costs, obviously a lot, and not being open as often as normal certainly helped that, but I guess we're open to any questions council may have.
Hey, councillors, do you have any questions? I have a few myself. Councillor Andrews.
What was the price difference like from what you guys had budgeted to what the tenders came in?
A lot. I think we budgeted $850 for the building and another $250 for all, your architect and all those other fees that go in there. I think our lowest bidder was about 1.6, I believe, high 1.6s. It was significantly over budget where, we couldn't just, and we did negotiate, for a couple of weeks with the lowest bidder. Things that we could shave off, things that maybe we didn't need right away, change in lighting, change in this, change in materials. And we were still a little ways apart, but we'd given up everything. A lot of the stuff we needed was now gone. So there was really no point in continuing those negotiations because we were getting a shell of a building and a basement and nothing upstairs is pretty much where we were at.
Well, and we still couldn't afford it.
And
So-
and we still couldn't afford it.
Councillor Souls.
So, were the bids from local companies or were they land from local land both?
No, all three bids came from out of town. There were 8 people that registered to bid and to do all that stuff. One of them was local. In the end, that particular business chose not to bid.
So I've got to, oh, go ahead.
We suspect the very quick turnaround time that we did have with our tender process, it was very quick, 2 to 3 weeks, just didn't allow the local contractor enough time to get that bid in as he was fairly busy with a bunch of civil works contracts that he had.
Okay, I noticed that your revenues were down $20,000 and your expenses were down about $80,000. So there was a $60,000 difference. Where did that $60,000 end up?
I'll leave that to the treasurer.
So I'm just trying to. I'm not quite sure what you're looking at to get those numbers.
Okay. Port Nelson Historical Society Consolidated Statement of Revenue and Expenditures for the year ended September 30th, 2020. I'm
Okay.
looking at the column 2019 for total revenue was 271,000 and the total revenue for 2020 was 250,000. So there was a
Right.
shortfall of about $21,000. When I look down at the expenditures column, I see 261,000 for 2019, $180,000 for 2020. So so that would be expenditures of $80,000 less than in 2019 and a revenue shortfall of 20,000.
Right, okay, I see what you're, basically, most of the we paid out a fair bit for the architect, planning information. We had some surveying done. We had that totaled to pretty close to $100,000 actually. So that's basically what we spent money on this year.
Okay, so that capital expenditure, when Ms. Aglinski was talking about budgeting $250,000 above the amount of the construction of the project. She said $850 for the project, $250,000 for architects, et cetera, et cetera. Was that $100,000 taken off that $250,000?
Yes,
Actually, Gary, it should have been 100 and whatever it was,
Yeah.
it was a $1 million budget. So I might have given you $100,000 too much money there.
yeah,
Okay.
that's about 150,000. So we've spent about 100,000 of that at this point.
All right. Now, the impact of the NDIT grant and the $1 million that Ms. Zaglinski was talking about from the grant from somebody or other someplace. What will be the impact of the $300,000 if you get that from the NDIT?
That is, built into the 5-year financial plan budget that you should have a copy of, I believe. I put in the full amount of the NDIT grant because I think we have a really good chance of getting that one. It's not guaranteed, of course, no grant ever is, but I know Kim has been going back and forth with them and it's sounding quite positive for that one. The other grant, the $1 million grant, is a less chance of getting it in the first place and also a chance that we may not get the full amount. And so we don't want to count on that so much. I did put a little bit of it in the budget there just so I could balance things off actually, but I don't know what the odds are of getting that one. But
So, just to be clear, the municipality holds a little over $1 million of the Historical Society's money. With a $300,000 grant, that would bring it up to about 1.3. Your project now is gone from about $1.1 million, $1.2 million, up to about $1.6 million. But $100,000 of that has already been paid for architecture fees and so on. Is that about, in a nutshell, is that about right?
that 1.6 was not including the architect's fees.
Okay. All right. So total now, we're looking at about 1.7 million. The municipality holds $1 million. With the NDIT grant, you'd be within 1.3 of the
That-
1.7. Is that about?
That
Well, what-
100,000 has already come out of the municipality funding, so we've been reimbursed for that. So that 1 million that the municipality holds, that money has already come out of there.
Okay.
So we're looking at hoping if the bids come in as high, and it's possible they won't. I mean, we had several things against us last year. There was a short turnaround on the, and I think, you know, if businesses don't have a lot of time, they tend to overestimate, right? If they, that's what I would do if I was in a business. If I'm putting in a bid for something and I don't have a lot of time to prepare that bid, I'm going to aim a little bit high because you don't want to come short, right? So they
Right.
had short time, so we anticipate things being a little higher over that. They also were anticipating a fall start. What we were hoping was they could actually start in September and work over the winter. And that's going to add to your costs. Like it has to add to your costs. I don't see any way you can't, you know, you can work in the winter and not have it add to your costs. So that was another issue with those bids from last summer. And you know, not as many people bid because of that short turnaround and stuff as well. So we're really hoping that the bids will come in lower than that 1.6. We were able with some negotiations to get a number lower than that, but as Kim said, we did give up quite a lot. Like basically the lower floor, which would be open to the public, was finished, but the upper floor, which will give us office space and meeting rooms and a few other things that we really need, would be essentially a shell, and we'd either have to finish it over a couple of years or do most of the work with volunteers. So, and I anticipate with the way building permits and stuff work that we might not get an occupancy permit for that top area until it's actually more complete. So we might not be able to even use it for a while. Anyway, I don't know, it is what it is. We're hoping to be able to go ahead, but without having the bids in and knowing for sure about the grants, it's hard to say for sure.
If the
Okay.
bids come in, as high as they did here this fall, there will still likely be a bit of a shortfall. If they come in lower, And if we get that NDIT grant, it's going to be close as to whether or not we can proceed. However, we don't want to completely wipe out that reserve funding either. There's still other things, in our, 5 or 10 year forecast that need to be done on the grounds itself. So, keeping that in the back of our minds as well. I think we've answered your question. We're also working with the school board office as well. They have a couple of capital projects this year. So we're actually trying to tie in our architect is working with their architect. We're trying to time it so that everything goes on to BC Bid together, and that our dates of viewing and things like that are the same. So if there is a company that wants to bid on both, it's convenient to do that because they can come and look at both projects ahead of time. We're sort of bending over backwards, thinking outside of the box in ways to make this possible.
So one of the things that we're very concerned about is we would like to see projects like that done by local contractors, but we understand that, you have to watch your bottom line and make sure that these, the projects come in on budget and you get the best contract for your construction. But there is that element of local work that we want to promote as well. Councillor Gerwin, you had some comments?
What's the difference in the interest that you thought you were earning and you're not? What's that dollar? Like, how much was that?
Couple $100,000.
So I'm writing down $200,000. That's what you had anticipated?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Councillor
Years
Penny.
ago, when we were pretty much getting ready to proceed, so this would have been, I think, spring of 2019, we thought we had about 1.4 million in there, of which we have spent about 100,000, but we're couple $100,000 short from what we thought we had.
Councillor Penny.
This is a question more to staff here. Did we earn this interest? Did the municipality earn that interest somewhere else?
So since the service agreements are no longer in place, all the municipal funds are held in one account. And the interest rate is based on the entire amount that the municipality holds, which would be about 0.75%. So probably about $7,500 a year on the amount of the reserve over that time, if you were looking apples to apples on what we truly are earning on that.
How was that? Sorry, Councillor Penny. I think back in the day, so pre-2009, there was a calculation of a fixed interest rate that I'm going to say maybe 3%, I think, was probably applied to at the time. That's the calculation of the interest rate back in the day. But in terms of the interest rate that we would actually receive, if you look at interest rates today, if money held in the bank would be around that, as Brian said, around that 0.75 or whatever the going interest rate is based on what the bank would provide. So there's
we had got occasional updates and they were lower than we anticipated, but we just thought it was due to, the interest rates have been really low. So, but we were still anticipating getting something, but anyway, yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions, councillors? All right, thank you for your presentation.
Okay, one thing I'd also like to say is we really have appreciated the support from the town over the years. It has really been able to keep the museum going and to make it what it is today, which I think is a major tourist attraction for the area. So we really appreciate your support all these years. And I'm not trying to whine about having less money in there because we're very lucky that we have that money at all. And we'll make it work one way or the other, whether it ends up taking us a little bit longer. It's already taken us quite a while to get to this point. So we'll get it going one way or another, but it would be really nice if we can go ahead with it this year. So we have our fingers crossed for the grants and all that kind of stuff. And yeah.
I'll just add one little tiny thing and I'm sure council will notice it on their own, that it's been quite some time since the museum has asked for the entire $200,000. We run a very, very tight ship. We're very, very frugal. We certainly aren't out spending money willy-nilly. We get what we need. If we can get it used, we get it used first. So, please keep that in the back of your mind, that we have a very, stringent budget. We're not overspending. We're not spending on things that we don't need. We're not luxury, we're not a luxury group. Those things are very important as well.
Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, sorry, Kyle. Go ahead.
Councillor Andrews, go ahead.
I was just going to attest to that. I sat in a few meetings on some of their very hard, well-used chairs.
Yeah.
Councillor Gerwing.
Okay, so just in response to what Kim was just saying, so what I heard was that there's not every year you ask for the full $200,000, but is it not your expectation every year that if you use, say, $80,000 in operating, the balance of the $200,000, you're expecting that to go into capital? Is
That's
that
what
your
I thought, but I
expectation?
was told that was incorrect.
I think that had been happening for some years, hadn't it?
That was what was happening until 2014. And actually since 2014, we've reduced our demands from taxes because we felt we had enough in reserve for the addition, and we thought it was growing to some extent. And so we've asked for less each year. I think for a couple of years it was around 160,000, and then it was around 130,000. And I think a couple of years it has been, I think in 2017, 19, and in fact 2020, it was less than that. So that I would assume means that that full 200,000 was not taken from the taxpayers.
So I guess I'm just trying to confirm what the expectation of the Historical Society is. So was the expectation that what you didn't use in operating, the difference between that and the $200,000 was put in the capital account? Was that the expectation?
Not unless we asked for it, but the way it's worked with the operating funds, we get a check from the town for that. For any capital funds that we request, and we can request for even things like roof repairs or whatever. So we submit receipts to the town and we get reimbursed for that. And so usually our request has two parts, a capital request and a operating funds request. So anything we don't use for the capital goes back into reserve. But if we only ask for 130,000, then that's all that gets taken from the taxpayers on our behalf. So
Okay.
that full 200,000 is not taken from the taxpayers unless we request it, in my understanding.
Mr. Carter, that's correct?
That is correct, yep.
So it
Councillor Gerwing?
seems in my particular case, I sat on council for 6 years and didn't completely understand how this worked.
So, and I have to say that if we had realized that there was no earnings on that money, we would have been leaving less money on the table there
Absolutely.
for the last several years, because, you know, we thought we had enough for what we wanted to do, plus extra to do some fencing and some paving and, you know, just general stuff like that. And now it looks like there may not be enough to do just the main project that we want to do because of increased cost, less money in there. So, and you know, I think that between Scott and Ryan and Kim and myself, we've established some good communication, which hasn't necessarily happened in the past. And so I think that moving forward, hopefully this kind of misunderstanding won't happen again, but.
Yeah, we had a great meeting with Scott and Ryan earlier this week. That was absolutely fantastic.
Well, it's good to hear that you feel that way. I guess I had one more question, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
So you've referred to the 5-year financial plan that you've put in some of the grant to go in the 5-year forecast or outlook, and other money has been dispersed in there. Is it your assumption that when the council of the day approves your 2021 budget ask, that they're also approving your 5-year financial plan?
Yes, that was our assumption.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess one of the things that I'd say is that, nowhere on the financial statements does it state the amount of money that the municipality holds for the Historical Society. And I would find that useful to know what, because when I think of the Historical Society, I think of that $1 million as an asset of the Historical Society. And perhaps that's not exactly the way that is. It's probably an asset of the municipality. But when I think of it, I think of this as money that is earmarked for the Historical Society. It would be nice to see that on a balance sheet under total assets of the Historical Society. Is this $1 million? Then there wouldn't be any discrepancy about who was holding how much money and for how long, and this could have been avoided. But anyway, having said that, maybe we'll make some changes in the future so there's a little bit more clarity.
Well, on the 5-year financial plan, so that would be this document, it does show at the end of the second page, it does show the estimated balance in reserve funding. However, the balance that we had on there, which included a line for earnings, was apparently not even close to accurate. So for quite some time, our 5-year financial plans, if anybody had actually really looked at them, were not accurate because they were assuming an amount in reserve funding that was not in fact there. And that line for earnings was right there on that plan every year. And nobody ever said, well, it's not getting any earnings. So, and that's been the last 11 years. So I don't know. I don't know what happened. I do know, it just came up on my Facebook memories that it was 10 years ago that Betty Gustafson passed away. She was our president at the time. It's possible if there was any communication with us, it went to her and it didn't get passed on while she was ill. Or maybe we just were never informed. I don't know. But sometime during that past 11 years, I would have thought someone would have noticed that there was that line on our budget that we weren't getting any earnings, and nobody, and there's even a little, an asterisk, and it was an estimate of 3% of earnings. And we knew that 3% was probably high in this day and age, given that it's hard to get. I mean, it depends on how things are invested too. If it's invested one way, you might get a lot more than 3%. If it's just getting interest, probably not. It's probably a lot less. But yeah, there was in fact nothing going to our account.
Okay, go ahead, Councilor Gurwing.
Sorry, Councilor Roper, did you want to go ahead of me?
Sure, thank you, Councilor Gurwing. I just wanted to make a comment that I'm regretful for the miscommunication, and for me, I would really like to see your project happen sooner than later. I think the community really needs things like this right now. We need hope, and new construction projects, new initiatives that brings hope to the community. So I'll be definitely trying to find ways to support you guys the best I can.
Just
Councilor
John,
Gurwing.
So I just wanted to follow up on the 5-year financial budget or plan. So I was just speaking for myself. When I'm sitting at the table making decisions on the budget, I'm just doing it on the year that we're in. It wasn't my understanding that we were approving the 5-year financial plan for any of our groups. Now, I might have that wrong. I don't know. Mr. Carter might be able to help me out there. But yeah, if I apologize if I've just been looking at a single year and should have been looking at the whole 5 years, that's my bad.
I could comment on that. I am fairly new to the process with this, but my understanding is that it is looked at a 1 year by year approving this year's budget. The 5-year financial plans would be a good indicator of capital projects that are coming in the horizon to spur that conversation on the budget, whether there's capital amounts needing to be put away, or if they're, you know, potentially starting to draw on a project in the next year. But my understanding is that it is the budget, and the 5-year plan is just an additional support to that.
You know, when you look at the green sheets that we provide, Councilor Grewing,
Yeah.
that document basically, and that's where, I mean, we chatted with you earlier and we chatted with Allison and Kim about it too, is there was a little discrepancy the past couple of years around the contribution to that reserve fund. What happens is the information gets provided to staff, and then so the Treasury Department, or in this case for Brian, and it'll get inputted into the system. And then what you're approving is that green sheet. The information behind that, in terms of the prep and the documentation provided, in this case by the Historical Society, is there for information. And obviously there should be some relation to it, but what you're approving is this year's budget. It doesn't mean just because you approved this year and there's a potential expenditure in the following year within the 5-year plan that you have to undo that at a later date because the 5-year plan was presented to you. It's more of an indication of what's on the horizon in terms of operating costs, potential capital, things of that nature. But what council is approving is this year's budget.
Okay,
And this
thanks.
year's
Yeah,
Mayor Foster, I'm
Yes,
sorry,
Go ahead.
I just forgot one tiny little thing, and it comes back to the whole local content piece. So we've been very clear, you know, in our tender process with those people interested and those people that came to visit the museum, to visit the site, that the local content is even more important to us than lowest bidder. Further to that, there is another component that the architect is working on now. He thinks the project might be a little bit small, but he should have an answer for me today, is in the tender, pulling out the mechanical piece, pulling out the electrical, pulling out the plumbing, only because in that original tender that we got, those things were all bid on locally or subcontracted to locally. We know that one of our local plumbing companies bid on the plumbing component with the actual lowest bidder. So there is the process of doing that as well, because no matter what we do going forward, those chunks probably aren't going to change that much. So there is the potential to pull those right out of the new tender, leave those, you know, as they were, and move forward that way. But of course, we also have things we've, you know, anything that we've done to date, we've, you know, looked local first. But I mean, of course, we don't have anybody here that can do the soil samples we needed, or the line locates, or things like that. But we are very cognizant, and we buy like 99.9% of our stuff locally. And it's important to us. It's important to the board. That's the direction I get every single day. And it's certainly the direction we've given to our architect about this project as much as we can, for sure.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Appreciate it. Is there any other comments, Councillor? Oh, Mr. Ryan.
Just to provide you just with one more clarification. So the reserve balance right now as it stands is 1.1 million. I know we had a few comments, there was $1 million. So it's 1.1 million right now. And with the current draft proposal that they've provided, it would put another 100,000 into the capital this year. So it would bring your starting point for this year up to about 1.2. So I just wanted to clarify that for the reserve point. Also, just a comment that I do appreciate the meeting and the work that Allison and Kim have had with ourselves. We do have a good plan going forward. The council's budget that's approved every year, the green sheet, it does have the reserve balance at the bottom of it every year the council approves. So moving forwards, we can just reconcile that with each user group's plans that they provide. So
Good. Okay, any other comments? Very well, thank you again. Mrs. Zaglinski and Ms. Starr for your presentation. We appreciate it. I will ask for a motion to adjourn the special regional council meeting. Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor? Carried, and we are adjourned.